lot to discuss, but I have to start with a story that has continued to percolate and continue to add layer after layer after layer. That's Kevin Durant with the Brooklyn Nets, because apparently as of yesterday, he has reaffirmed his commitment to the Brooklyn Nets. He and his agent, Rich Kleiman, they met with Sean Marks, Steve Nash, and the rest of the Brooklyn Nets brass and ownership group, Joe Tsai, and basically just said, I'm staying. And they agreed to continue this partnership that will keep Kevin Durant in Brooklyn at least for the following season, because obviously this is the first year that his recent 4-year, $198 million contract that he signed last offseason, it goes into effect at the start of this year. So he's locked in. They have mutually agreed to continue this partnership. And obviously we all remember that back on June 30th, Durant requested a trade, wasn't traded. So earlier this month in London, he met with Joe Tsai face-to-face, reaffirmed his desire to be traded, provided him that infamous ultimatum, choose me or fire Steve Nash and Sean Marks. Joe Tsai didn't cave, he didn't acquiesce, and now we're in the situation that we're in. And I personally believe, and I've believed this ever since he first requested a trade, that the root of the issue, the root of the conflict for Kevin Durant, the root for his decision to want out of Brooklyn had to do with just a lack of trust. Lack of trust in Kyrie, lack of trust in the Brooklyn Nets organization. He felt betrayed that Kyrie wouldn't get vaccinated. He was irritated and frustrated with the way that James Harden was quitting his way out of Brooklyn and the way that that whole situation was mismanaged. He felt like the organization was letting him down in some respects. He was disappointed by the lack of creativity in the offensive schemes and the adjustments by head coach Steve Nash. He disliked the fact that the organization was unwilling to extend Kyrie and sign him to a long-term contract in the offseason. So there were a host of different reasons why Kevin Durant wanted out of Brooklyn. But it all revolves, to me, again, around that lack of trust. And that's so important, especially with talented elite star level players, is they need to feel like they've got trust within the organization. They've got trust that the organization is going to do everything they can to appease them. Some ownership groups and some general managers are willing to do that. Others are not. But while all those factors were at play, the second part to this is I don't think that Joe Tsai, Sean Marks, or the Nets were earnestly engaging in trade discussions. They did receive some legitimate offers for Kevin Durant. The Celtics, I think, offered a legitimate package around Jaylen Brown for Kevin Durant. But other organizations, they were kind of pretending. They weren't really giving their best stuff. And so I think ultimately the Nets had kind of always established internally, we're not going to trade this guy. And I think at some point, Kevin Durant was forced to resign to the fact that he wasn't going anywhere. And he kind of had to accept that this is his situation. And in the long term and in the best interest of the team and the players, it was much more prudent to just break bread, try to move past this, put on a happy face, and return. Because ultimately, no chemistry, no cohesion can be established if you have your star player at least appearing to want out of the team. And I would imagine that this is what happened at this meeting between Rich Kleiman, Kevin Durant, and Nets brass. They met in LA just a couple days ago. And I would imagine that the Nets ownership group, they expressly laid out this situation, this reality to Kevin Durant. They probably said that they regretted to inform him that there unfortunately weren't any suitable trade partners at this time. and they just couldn't trade him. There wasn't anything that was there weren't any packages that were commensurate with who Kevin Durant is. And that's the difficult part as an elite player. And from Kevin Durant's perspective, do I still think that he wants out of Brooklyn? Probably. I don't think he's perfectly content with Brooklyn. But he's been forced to face reality, and that is he's staying with the Brooklyn Nets. It's almost like he had intended to enter into one of those hypersleep pods from Interstellar and set a waking up date where when he'd wake up, he'd be traded somewhere else. And unfortunately, that wake up date got set way too early, and he woke up and was still with the Brooklyn Nets, and unfortunately had to face that reality again. And you have to make the best of the situation that you're in. But it was just the smartest basketball decision once he realized he wasn't going to be traded anywhere. Better to try to establish some good faith, some trust as early on in this offseason as you can. It's all about the trust. And if the trust isn't there, the team's not going to have much success. We saw that the chemistry is what plagued them last season. Now, as it relates to the dynamic with Steve Nash, their head coach, that's uncertain. That's uncertain because if someone was trying to get me fired behind my back, would I be eager to work with that person again? Ask me later if I'm in that situation. Now, a theory, I've often theorized, I don't know how much I truly believe this, but part of me almost wonders if Kevin Durant actually tipped Steve Nash off about, hey, I'm going to basically provide the Nets with this ultimatum, either choose me or choose you. And he kind of greenlit the idea to KD because he knew fully well he had the full support and backing of Nets ownership group. Now, I don't truly and firmly believe that, but it's something that I've hypothesized perhaps could be at play given their previous relationship, given the fact that it had seemed on the surface like those two guys had mutual respect for one another. And Kevin Durant had spoken glowingly about him. But you think about Durant dealing with the Kyrie situation, dealing with Harden, dealing with the ignominy of losing in the first round to the Celtics, getting swept in the first round. All of that floating around, and now he's got to return back to this team. But the reality is, for Kevin Durant, there are worse places to return to. And the Brooklyn Nets were trying to pitch him on this idea. Listen, I know you're frustrated about not being traded, but try to enter this training camp into this season with a whole heart. And look at the roster that we've compiled, that we've constructed around you. Because the reality is, you have KD, you have Kyrie. And again, this is a big if. This is a big if. But if Kyrie Irving and Ben Simmons are actually able to play and are committed and invested in this season and in this team, this can be a very dangerous team. You've got KD, you've got Kyrie, you've got Ben Simmons, who purportedly is fully healthy and ready to go. You've retained Nick Claxton. You've re-signed Patty Mills. You acquired Royce O'Neal and TJ Warren. Joe Harris, the sniper's coming back. You also still have Seth Curry. Those are 9 guys. This is a legitimate 9-man deep roster. And most NBA teams can't actually say that they've got 9 deep on their team. So for me, this is a really an extremely talented group. They're perhaps missing one serviceable big. But beyond that, it's about as good as it gets if you're the Brooklyn Nets. Now, chemistry is obviously the big issue. Again, that was their Achilles heel last year. They didn't have any chemistry. They weren't able to establish chemistry because their key players were missing substantial amount of time. And this might not be Shangri-La for KD. But again, it's about as ideal as it can get for a team that you're returning to. And if they are able to buy into this season, on paper, this is a team that should be contending for an NBA championship and already came into the season with some of the highest odds to win the NBA title. But now they could be the favorites or co-favorites to come out of the East. But certainly an interesting revelation. I also love how the statement that was released by he and Rich Kleiman, along with the Nets' Sean Marks, Steve Nash, and Joe Tsai, the ownership group, it was rubber stamped with the boardroom logo at the bottom of the statement. It's almost like they had to ensure that they were the ones that initiated everything. Just an interesting observation.